The morning sun cast long shadows across the military shooting range as Sarah Chen adjusted her position on the concrete firing line. At 24 years old, she looked more like a college student than someone who belonged on a military base. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often caused people to underestimate her, which was exactly how she preferred it. Sarah worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense, specializing in weapons testing and ballistics analysis. Most people assumed she was just another pencil pusher who happened to work around guns. They had no idea about the countless hours she spent perfecting her marksmanship skills or the natural talent that had been with her since childhood. The range was mostly empty at this early hour, which was perfect for Sarah's morning routine. She had been coming here for 6 months, ever since her transfer to this base, and had established a pattern that few people noticed. Every morning at 600 hours, she would arrive with her personal rifle case and spend exactly 1 hour practicing. Her rifle was nothing fancy by military standards. A standard Remington 700 in .308 Winchester, the same kind used by many civilian hunters and target shooters. She had modified it slightly with a better scope and trigger, but it was still basic compared to the military-grade weapons that filled the base armory. Sarah unzipped her rifle case with practiced efficiency. The morning routine was almost meditative for her. Check the rifle, load the magazine, adjust the scope settings, and begin her practice sequence. She started every session the same way, with 5 shots at 100 yards to warm up and confirm her 0. The first shot rang out across the empty range. Through her scope, Sarah could see the bullet hole appear exactly where she had aimed, dead center in the bullseye. The second, third, fourth, and fifth shots followed in rapid succession, each one creating a tight cluster that could be covered by a quarter. Most shooters would be proud of such accuracy, but for Sarah, this was just the beginning. She moved her target back to 200 yards and repeated the process. Again, 5 shots created a tight group in the center of the target. The pattern continued as she moved progressively farther back, testing herself at 300, 400, and finally 500 yards. At 500 yards, the targets became small dots that most people would struggle to see clearly, even with a scope. But Sarah's groups remained consistently tight. She had a natural ability to read wind conditions, compensate for bullet drop, and maintain steady breathing that impressed even seasoned military instructors who occasionally watched her practice. What made Sarah's shooting even more remarkable was her speed. While many precision shooters took their time between shots, carefully calculating every variable, Sarah seemed to work on instinct. She would acquire her target, make minute adjustments for conditions, and fire with a rhythm that suggested years of intensive training. The truth was that Sarah had been shooting since she was 8 years old. Her grandfather, a Marine Corps veteran who had served in Vietnam, had recognized her natural talent early and nurtured it carefully. He had taught her not just how to shoot, but how to think like a marksman, how to read the environment, understand ballistics, and develop the mental discipline that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. After her grandfather's death when she was 16, Sarah had continued developing her skills largely on her own. She had won numerous civilian competitions throughout college, but had always kept a low profile about her abilities. Her academic pursuits in engineering and ballistics had been her primary focus, with shooting remaining a personal passion rather than a career path. Now, working in weapons testing, Sarah found herself in a unique position. She understood both the technical aspects of firearms and ammunition and the practical application of marksmanship. Her engineering background allowed her to analyze and improve weapon systems, while her shooting skills let her personally test their effectiveness. As Sarah finished her 500-yard sequence, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A group of men in military fatigues had arrived at the range and were setting up their equipment about 50 yards to her left. She could tell from their bearing and the way they moved that these were not ordinary soldiers. The group consisted of 5 men, all carrying themselves with the confident professionalism that marked them as special operations personnel. Their equipment was top-tier military gear, and their weapons were the kind that required special authorization to access. Sarah recognized the distinctive suppressors and advanced optics that indicated these men were likely Navy SEALs or another elite unit. Sarah tried to focus on her own shooting, but she could sense the men watching her. It was not uncommon for military personnel to be curious about civilians on the range, especially when those civilians were clearly skilled shooters. She decided to ignore the attention and continue with her practice routine. Moving her target back to 600 yards, Sarah began what was usually her final sequence of the morning. At this distance, the target appeared as a tiny speck even through her 10-power scope. The wind conditions had picked up slightly, and she needed to compensate for the increased bullet drop and drift. Sarah's first shot at 600 yards struck just slightly left of center. She made a quick mental calculation, adjusted for the wind, and fired her second shot. This one struck dead center. The third, fourth, and fifth shots followed the same pattern, creating a group that would be impressive even for military snipers using much more expensive equipment. As she was preparing to pack up her rifle, one of the special operations personnel approached her. He was a tall man in his early 30s with the lean, muscular build of someone who maintained peak physical condition. His name tape read Johnson, and the insignia on his uniform confirmed Sarah's suspicion that he was a Navy SEAL. "Excuse me, ma'am," Johnson said politely. "I couldn't help but notice your shooting. That's some impressive accuracy, especially at 600 yards with that setup." Sarah looked up from her rifle case, slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you. I've been practicing for a while. Mind if I ask what your background is? That kind of precision doesn't usually develop overnight." Sarah hesitated. She preferred to keep her shooting abilities separate from her professional life, but there was something in Johnson's tone that suggested genuine professional interest rather than idle curiosity. "I work in weapons testing here on base," she replied carefully. "The shooting is more of a hobby that helps with my job understanding how the systems perform in practical applications." Johnson nodded, but Sarah could see he was evaluating her answer. Military personnel, especially special operations, were trained to assess people quickly and accurately. She had the feeling that he was seeing more than she was comfortable revealing. "We're about to do some long-range work ourselves," Johnson said, gesturing toward his team. "We'll be shooting out to 800 and 1,000 yards. You're welcome to stay and watch if you're interested." Sarah's curiosity was definitely piqued. Watching Navy SEALs conduct precision shooting training would be valuable both professionally and personally. She also suspected that Johnson's invitation was as much about observing her reactions as it was about being polite. "I'd like that, thank you," she said, packing up her rifle but leaving her spotting scope and range gear accessible. As Johnson returned to his team, Sarah could hear bits of their conversation. They were discussing wind conditions, range cards, and firing solutions in the technical language that she recognized from her own training and professional work. These men were clearly experts in their field, and their equipment reflected their level of skill. The team's rifles were Barrett M107A1 .50 caliber anti-material rifles, weapons that cost more than most people's cars and were capable of engaging targets at extreme distances. The 50 BMG cartridges they were using could maintain lethal effectiveness beyond 1,500 yards in the right hands, far exceeding the range capabilities of Sarah's .308 Winchester. Sarah set up her spotting scope to observe the team's shooting. The Barrett rifles were impressive weapons, but they were also significantly more challenging to shoot accurately than her lighter rifle. The recoil was substantial, the weight was considerable, and the ballistics were complex enough that they required extensive training to master. The first SEAL took position behind one of the Barrett rifles and began his firing sequence at 800 yards. Through her spotting scope, Sarah could see his shots impacting the target with good accuracy. though not quite the precision she had been achieving at shorter distances with her rifle. This was not a criticism of his skill, but rather a reflection of the different challenges presented by the larger weapon system. As each team member took their turn, Sarah found herself unconsciously analyzing their techniques and noting small variations in their approaches. Some preferred to take more time between shots, while others worked more quickly. All were clearly competent marksmen, but she could see subtle differences in their methods that reflected their individual training and experience. What struck Sarah most was the professional seriousness with which they approached their practice. This was not casual target shooting, but serious training that could mean the difference between mission success and failure in actual combat situations. The precision required for their work went far beyond what most people understood about military marksmanship. When the team finished their 800-yard sequence and began setting up targets at 1,000 yards, Sarah realized she was witnessing something special. Very few ranges allowed shooting at such distances, and fewer still had personnel qualified to engage targets effectively at that range. She was seeing some of the most skilled marksmen in the world practicing their craft. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself drawn into the technical discussions about wind reading, ballistic calculations, and equipment optimization. Her engineering background allowed her to contribute meaningfully to conversations about bullet design, barrel harmonics, and scope adjustments. The SEALs seemed surprised by her technical knowledge and began asking more detailed questions about her professional background. It became clear that these men were not just impressive shooters, but also serious students of their craft. They understood the science behind marksmanship in ways that went far beyond simply pulling triggers accurately. Their questions about ballistics and weapon systems were sophisticated enough that Sarah found herself discussing concepts she rarely had opportunities to explore with other people. The morning was turning into an unexpectedly interesting professional and educational experience. Sarah had come to the range for her usual solo practice routine, but instead found herself engaged with some of the most skilled marksmen in the military. It was the kind of encounter that reminded her why she loved both the technical and practical aspects of her work with weapons systems. Little did Sarah know that this chance meeting was about to lead to an opportunity that would change her understanding of her own capabilities and open doors she had never imagined possible. The Navy SEALs were about to discover just how exceptional her skills really were, and their reaction would surprise everyone present, including Sarah herself. As the Navy SEAL team prepared for their 1,000-yard shots, Johnson approached Sarah again. There was something different in his expression now, a calculating look that suggested he was forming an idea. "Sarah," he said, having learned her name during their technical discussions, "we've been having some issues with our ballistic calculations at extreme range. Our usual shooter for these distances is deployed, and we're working with some new ammunition loads that we need to test. Would you be willing to help us spot and provide some technical insight?" Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Working directly with Navy SEALs on precision shooting was far outside her normal job description, but the opportunity to see their methods up close was too valuable to pass up. "I'd be happy to help however I can," she replied, trying to keep her voice professional despite her enthusiasm. Johnson led her closer to the firing line where the Barrett rifles were positioned. Up close, the weapons were even more impressive. The M107A1 was a semi-automatic 50-caliber rifle weighing nearly 30 pounds when loaded. The massive muzzle brake and advanced optics system gave it an intimidating appearance that matched its devastating capability. "The issue we're having," explained Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the team's designated marksman, "is that these new match-grade rounds are performing differently than our standard ammunition. We're getting inconsistent results at long range, and we need to figure out if it's the ammunition, our calculations, or our technique." Sarah examined the ammunition Rodriguez showed her. The 50 BMG cartridges were indeed match grade, with precision-manufactured bullets designed for extreme accuracy. However, she noticed immediately that the bullet weight was different from standard military ammunition, which would significantly affect ballistic performance. "These bullets are about 50 grains heavier than standard," Sarah observed. "That's going to change your trajectory calculations substantially, especially beyond 800 yards. The heavier bullet will have less velocity but better wind resistance and energy retention." The SEALs exchanged glances. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That matches what we suspected, but we haven't been able to get consistent verification. Would you mind running some numbers for us?" For the next hour, Sarah worked with the team to develop new range cards for the ammunition. Using her engineering background and ballistics knowledge, she calculated trajectory tables that accounted for the heavier bullets, current atmospheric conditions, and the specific characteristics of their rifles. The process revealed just how much technical expertise went into elite-level marksmanship. Every variable had to be considered: air density, temperature, humidity, wind speed, and direction at multiple points along the bullet's flight path, the rifle's specific ballistic characteristics, and even the rotation of the Earth for extremely long shots. "All right," Johnson said after Sarah had completed her calculations. "Rodriguez, why don't you try the 1,000-yard target using Sarah's numbers and see how they work?" Rodriguez positioned himself behind the Barrett and began his pre-shot routine. Sarah watched through her spotting scope as he settled into position, controlled his breathing, and prepared to fire. The rifle's report was significantly louder than her .308, and the muzzle blast created a visible shockwave in the morning air. Through the spotting scope, Sarah could see the bullet impact about 2 inches high and 1 inch left of the target center. For most shooters, this would be considered an excellent shot at 1,000 yards. However, she noticed that Rodriguez's technique, while skilled, included some small inconsistencies that might be contributing to the group size. "Good hit," Sarah called out. "Impact was about 2 inches high, 1 left." Rodriguez fired 4 more shots, creating a group about 6 inches in diameter. Again, this was respectable accuracy for the distance and conditions, but Sarah could see room for improvement. "The numbers seem to be working," Rodriguez said as he cleared the rifle. "But I'm still getting more dispersion than I'd like." Johnson had been watching Sarah carefully throughout the shooting sequence. "You've been observing pretty intently. Do you see anything that might help tighten up the groups?" Sarah hesitated. Offering technical advice about calculations was one thing, but critiquing the shooting technique of a Navy SEAL was entirely different. These men were among the best marksmen in the world, and she was just a civilian contractor. "I'm not sure it's my place to make suggestions about technique," she said diplomatically. "Please," Rodriguez said, surprising her with his openness. "If you see something that might help, I want to hear it. We're always looking to improve." Sarah took a deep breath. "I noticed that your natural point of aim seems to be drifting slightly between shots. It's very subtle, but at 1,000 yards, even tiny variations get magnified significantly. Also, your follow-through after the shot could be extended just a bit to ensure the rifle tracks straight during recoil." Rodriguez considered this feedback seriously. "Show me what you mean about the natural point of aim." For the next few minutes, Sarah worked with Rodriguez to help him identify and correct the slight inconsistency in his position. It was a minor adjustment, but one that could make a significant difference at extreme ranges. "Why don't you try a few more shots and see if that helps?" Johnson suggested. Rodriguez's next group was noticeably tighter, with 4 of 5 shots falling within a 4-inch circle. The improvement was obvious to everyone present. "That's definitely better," Rodriguez admitted. "I can feel the difference in consistency." Johnson stepped forward with a thoughtful expression. "Sarah, I have an unusual request. Would you be willing to try a few shots with the Barrett? I'm curious to see how your technique translates to a different weapon system." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Shooting a Barrett M107A1 had never been on her list of possibilities, but the opportunity was incredibly tempting from both personal and professional standpoints. "I've never fired a .50 caliber rifle before," she said honestly. "The recoil and handling characteristics are completely different from what I'm used to." "That's exactly why I'd like to see you try it," Johnson replied. "Sometimes fresh perspective and natural ability can overcome lack of experience with a specific platform." The other team members had gathered around, clearly interested in seeing how the civilian contractor would handle their primary weapon system. There was no mockery or skepticism in their attitudes, just professional curiosity. Sarah approached the Barrett with the same methodical care she applied to her own rifle. She examined the scope settings, checked the magazine, and familiarized herself with the safety and trigger mechanisms. The weapon was much heavier than anything she had handled before, but the basic principles of marksmanship remained the same. Settling into position behind the rifle, Sarah immediately noticed the different balance and weight distribution. The Barrett's bipod system was more stable than her portable shooting rest, but the overall mass of the weapon required adjustments to her usual shooting position. She aimed at the 1,000-yard target and began her breathing routine. The scope picture was incredibly clear, with magnification and optical quality far superior to her personal equipment. However, she had to adapt her sight picture and aiming process to account for the different reticle design and ballistic characteristics. Sarah's first shot with the Barrett surprised everyone, including herself. The massive rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable, and through the spotting scope, the impact was visible just half an inch from the target center. "Outstanding first shot," Rodriguez called out. "Dead on for windage, just slightly high." The second shot struck even closer to center, and the third was a perfect bullseye. By her fifth shot, Sarah had created a group that was tighter than Rodriguez's improved performance, despite her complete inexperience with the weapon system. "How is that possible?" asked Corporal Martinez, one of the younger team members. "She's never fired that rifle before." Johnson was studying Sarah with renewed interest. "Some people just have natural ability that transcends specific equipment. But this level of immediate adaptation is unusual even among experienced marksmen." Sarah was equally surprised by her performance. The Barrett handled differently from her rifle, but something about the weapon's precision engineering and stability actually made it easier to shoot accurately once she adjusted to its characteristics. "The rifle is incredibly stable," she explained. "The weight and bipod system eliminate a lot of the tiny movements that can affect accuracy. The trigger is also very precise, which makes timing the shot easier." "Most people find the weight and recoil intimidating," Rodriguez noted. "It usually takes several range sessions just to get comfortable with the system." "I think her engineering background helps," Johnson observed. "She understands the mechanical aspects of what's happening so she can adapt more quickly to different systems." The morning had evolved into something none of them had expected. What started as routine training for the SEALs had become an impromptu evaluation of a civilian contractor's remarkable marksmanship abilities. Sarah's performance with the Barrett had clearly impressed the team, but more importantly, it had revealed capabilities that went far beyond what her job title suggested. "Sarah," Johnson said after she had finished shooting, "would you be interested in helping us with some more advanced testing? We have access to ranges that go out to 1,500 yards, and we're always looking for qualified personnel to assist with equipment evaluation and training development." The offer was unexpected and exciting. Working with Navy SEALs on advanced marksmanship projects would be a dream assignment for someone with her background and interests. "That sounds very interesting," Sarah replied carefully. "What kind of testing are you talking about?" "We're developing new training protocols for extreme-range precision shooting," Rodriguez explained. "The project requires someone who understands both the technical aspects of ballistics and the practical application of marksmanship. Your background seems perfect for that kind of work." Johnson pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. After a brief conversation, he returned with a more formal expression. "Sarah, I just spoke with our team leader. He's very interested in having you participate in some specialized testing we have scheduled for next week. It would require security clearance verification and official approval, but if you're interested, we'd like to put you through a more comprehensive evaluation." The opportunity was beyond anything Sarah had imagined when she arrived for her routine morning practice. Working with Navy SEALs on advanced marksmanship projects would be the chance of a lifetime, both professionally and personally. "What kind of evaluation?" she asked. "Various shooting challenges, technical assessments, and practical applications," Johnson explained. "We need to verify that today's performance wasn't just luck or ideal conditions. The work we do requires consistent accuracy under pressure and in varied environments." Sarah considered the implications. This could be a significant step in her career, opening doors to specialized military contracting work that few civilians ever had opportunities to pursue. On the other hand, it would also mean much greater scrutiny and responsibility. "I'm definitely interested," she said finally. "When and where would this evaluation take place?" "Next Monday, 0800 hours at the Advanced Training Facility about 20 miles north of here. I'll send you the details and coordinate with your supervisor to ensure you have authorization to participate." As the morning session concluded and the SEALs began packing their equipment, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her routine practice had changed course. She had come to the range expecting nothing more than her usual hour of solo shooting, but instead had found herself being recruited for specialized work with one of the military's most elite units. The Barrett rifle that had seemed so intimidating initially now felt like a natural extension of her abilities. More importantly, she had gained the respect and professional interest of marksmen whose standards were among the highest in the world. As she packed her own equipment, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what challenges the formal evaluation would present, and whether her performance that morning was truly representative of her capabilities or just an exceptional day at the range. Monday morning arrived with overcast skies and a steady crosswind that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Sarah had spent the weekend researching advanced shooting techniques and reviewing ballistics data, preparing for whatever tests the Navy SEALs might present. Her normal morning routine felt different, knowing that this evaluation could change the direction of her career. The advanced training facility was unlike any range Sarah had seen before. Multiple firing points extended out to distances she had only read about in technical manuals. Targets were positioned at 800, 1,000, 1,200, and 1,500 yards, with additional stations for various specialized shooting scenarios. The facility clearly supported training for missions requiring the highest levels of precision marksmanship. Johnson met her at the facility entrance along with a man she hadn't met before. Lieutenant Commander Blake was the team leader Johnson had mentioned. A serious-looking officer in his late 30s with the bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Ms. Chen," Blake said, extending his hand. "Johnson tells me you showed some impressive skills last week. Today we're going to see how those skills hold up under more challenging conditions." The evaluation began with paperwork and security procedures, followed by a comprehensive safety briefing that emphasized the extreme ranges and powerful weapons they would be using. Sarah signed documents acknowledging the risks and agreeing to maintain confidentiality about the specific training methods and equipment she would observe. "The first phase will be similar to what you did last week," Blake explained as they walked toward the firing line. "We want to establish a baseline for your accuracy and consistency with the Barrett system. However, today's conditions are more demanding." The crosswind was gusting between 8 and 15 miles per hour, creating constantly changing conditions that would require continuous adjustments. The overcast sky made range estimation more difficult, and the humidity was high enough to affect ballistic performance. Sarah set up at the 1,000-yard line with the same Barrett M107A1 she had used the previous week. This time, however, she was being formally evaluated rather than just helping with training. The pressure was definitely present, but her grandfather's training had prepared her for shooting under stress. Her first 5-shot group measured just under 4 inches, demonstrating that her previous performance had not been a fluke. Blake and Johnson observed silently, taking notes and occasionally conferring in low voices. The other team members watched with professional interest, clearly curious about this civilian who had impressed their colleagues. "Excellent consistency," Blake commented after Sarah completed the sequence. "Now we're going to increase the complexity. Move back to 1,200 yards and engage targets in a specific sequence under time pressure." The 1,200-yard challenge was significantly more difficult. At that distance, even small errors in wind reading or range estimation would cause complete misses. The time pressure added another layer of complexity, requiring Sarah to balance speed with precision. Blake explained the scenario. 5 targets positioned at slightly different ranges around 1,200 yards, to be engaged in a specific order within a 10-minute time limit. This simulated the kind of precise shooting that might be required in actual operations, where multiple threats needed to be neutralized quickly and accurately. Sarah studied the targets through her scope, calculating the minor range differences and wind variations for each position. Her engineering background proved invaluable as she worked out the ballistic solutions in her head, creating a mental map of the adjustments needed for each target. The timer started, and Sarah began engaging the targets with methodical precision. Her shots came at a steady rhythm, each one preceded by a brief pause to confirm the wind conditions and make final adjustments. When the timer stopped, she had successfully hit all 5 targets with shots that would have been lethal in a combat situation. "Outstanding performance," Rodriguez commented as they reviewed the target results. "Most of our guys need several attempts to complete that sequence successfully." Blake's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could sense that she was meeting whatever standards they had set. The evaluation continued with increasingly complex scenarios, including shooting from different positions, engaging moving targets, and demonstrating rapid target acquisition skills. Each challenge revealed different aspects of marksmanship that went beyond simple accuracy. Sarah's ability to adapt quickly to new scenarios, maintain composure under pressure, and apply technical knowledge to practical problems impressed the team members who had seen many skilled shooters struggle with these same tests. The morning progressed to the 1,500-yard range, where the challenges became truly extreme. At that distance, the targets were barely visible even through high-power scopes, and environmental factors had massive effects on bullet trajectory. A single mile-per-hour error in wind reading could result in a complete miss. "This is where we separate the exceptional marksman from the merely skilled," Blake explained, as Sarah prepared for the final phase of testing. "Very few people can consistently hit targets at this range, even with unlimited time and ideal conditions." The 1,500-yard target appeared as a tiny speck through Sarah's scope. The wind conditions were complex, with different speeds and directions at various points along the bullet's flight path. She spent several minutes studying the environmental indicators, using techniques her grandfather had taught her for reading wind patterns across long distances. Her first shot at 1,500 yards struck about 6 inches low and 2 inches left of center. Not a perfect hit, but close enough to demonstrate that she could consistently engage targets at that extreme range. More importantly, she understood exactly why the shot had missed and how to correct for it. The second shot was significantly closer, and the third was a direct hit. By her 5th shot, Sarah had created a group that would be impressive even by military sniper standards. The team members were clearly impressed, but Blake seemed to be evaluating something beyond just her shooting performance. "Sarah," Blake said after she completed the 1,500-yard sequence. "You've demonstrated exceptional marksmanship abilities that frankly exceed what we normally see from experienced military marksmen. However, we need to understand something about your background and motivations before we can proceed further." The question Sarah had been dreading finally arrived. She had known that eventually someone would want to know how a civilian contractor had developed such advanced skills and why she had kept them largely hidden. "My grandfather was a Marine Corps sniper in Vietnam," Sarah began, deciding that complete honesty was the best approach. "He recognized that I had natural ability when I was very young and spent years training me properly. After he died, I continued developing my skills but focused on the academic side rather than pursuing military or law enforcement careers." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the technical foundation, but not the level of performance we've observed. Have you had any other formal training?" "No formal military or law enforcement training," Sarah replied. "Most of my development has been through self-study, civilian competitions, and practical application of ballistics engineering principles." Johnson stepped forward with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "Blake, I think there's something else we need to test. Sarah, would you be willing to attempt something that we normally reserve for our most experienced operators?" The question carried in weight that suggested this was the real evaluation, that everything up to this point had been preliminary assessment. "What kind of test?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Blake and Johnson exchanged glances before Blake spoke. "We have a scenario that requires engaging multiple targets at various ranges under extreme time pressure while accounting for complex environmental conditions. It's designed to simulate the most demanding precision shooting situations our operators might face. The catch," Johnson added, "is that it requires using my personal Barrett. It's customized specifically for my shooting style and has modifications that make it different from the standard weapons you've been using." Johnson's personal Barrett was indeed different from the military-issue rifles. The stock had been adjusted for his specific dimensions. The trigger had been professionally tuned to a lighter pull weight, and the scope was a premium civilian model that cost more than most people's cars. For Sarah to achieve accuracy with this rifle, she would need to adapt not just to different equipment, but to equipment optimized for someone else's physical characteristics and shooting style. The scenario involves 6 targets at ranges from 800 to 1,500 yards, engaged in a specific sequence based on threat priority. Blake explained. "You'll have 12 minutes to complete the sequence, and each target must be hit in a specific zone to count as a successful engagement." This was clearly the test that would determine whether Sarah's abilities were truly exceptional or simply the result of favorable conditions and equipment familiarity. Johnson's personal rifle represented the highest level of precision shooting equipment, but it was configured for his use, not hers. Sarah examined Johnson's Barrett carefully, noting the differences in stock dimensions, trigger characteristics, and scope reticle. The rifle was undoubtedly capable of extreme accuracy, but she would need to adapt her shooting technique to compensate for the different ergonomics. "Take some time to get familiar with the setup," Johnson offered. "You can fire a few practice shots to understand how it handles." Sarah's practice shots revealed both the rifle's capabilities and the challenges of using equipment optimized for someone else. The lighter trigger required a different touch than she was accustomed to, and the stock dimensions forced her to modify her normal shooting position. However, the rifle's accuracy potential was extraordinary, capable of precision that exceeded even the military-grade weapons she had been using. "Ready when you are," Blake announced after Sarah had fired her practice shots. The timer started, and Sarah began the most challenging shooting sequence of her life. The targets were positioned to require constant recalculation of ballistic solutions, wind compensation, and range adjustments. The time pressure meant that each shot had to be taken quickly, but without sacrificing the precision necessary to hit the designated zones. Sarah's first target was at 1,200 yards, requiring a shot that compensated for a quartering crosswind and elevated target position. Her shot struck the designated zone cleanly. The second target, at 800 yards, required a completely different ballistic solution, but needed to be engaged quickly to stay within the time constraint. As the sequence progressed, Sarah found herself entering a state of focused concentration that blocked out everything except the immediate requirements of each shot. Her engineering background allowed her to calculate adjustments rapidly, while her years of shooting experience provided the muscle memory needed to execute the shots consistently. The most challenging target was the final one, positioned at 1,500 yards with a requirement to hit a zone roughly 8 inches in diameter. The wind had shifted since her previous shots at that range, requiring her to recalculate completely while working against the time constraint. Sarah settled into position behind Johnson's Barrett for the final shot. Through the scope, the target appeared impossibly small, and the wind indicators showed complex patterns that would challenge any marksman. She made her calculations, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the precise pressure required by the customized trigger system. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. Through her scope, Sarah could see the bullet impact directly in the center of the designated zone, completing the sequence with time to spare. For several seconds, the range was completely silent. Blake, Johnson, and the other team members stood motionless as they processed what they had just witnessed. Sarah had not only completed one of their most challenging evaluations, but had done so using unfamiliar equipment under conditions that tested every aspect of advanced marksmanship. Johnson walked over to where Sarah was clearing the rifle and extending the weapon toward her with a gesture that spoke volumes about what had just occurred. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think you should hold on to this for a while. We're going to need your help with some projects that require capabilities like what we just witnessed." The moment represented more than just an impressive shooting performance. It was recognition from some of the world's most skilled marksmen that Sarah's abilities were truly exceptional, worthy of their respect and professional partnership. Blake stepped forward with an expression that combined surprise with professional admiration. "Ms. Chen, I've been evaluating marksmen for 15 years, and I've never seen a civilian demonstrate that level of performance under these conditions. We'd like to offer you a position as a specialized contractor working directly with our advanced training programs." The offer represented everything Sarah had never realized she wanted: the opportunity to work with elite military units, applying both her technical knowledge and practical skills to the most challenging precision shooting applications imaginable. "What kind of work would be involved?" Sarah asked, though her excitement was evident. "Developing training protocols, testing advanced weapon systems, and occasionally providing direct support for specialized operations that require your particular combination of skills," Johnson explained. "It would mean security clearance upgrades, specialized training, and becoming part of a very select group of civilian contractors who work at this level." Sarah looked at the Barrett rifle still in her hands, then at the faces of the men who had just offered her a chance to use her abilities in ways she had never imagined possible. The morning had started as a simple evaluation and had become an opportunity to join an elite community of professionals dedicated to the highest standards of precision marksmanship. "When would I start?" she asked, her decision already made. Johnson smiled for the first time that morning. "Welcome to the team, Sarah. I think you're going to fit in perfectly." The small civilian contractor who had been just practicing that morning a week ago had proven herself capable of performance that exceeded the expectations of Navy SEALs. More importantly, she had found her true calling in work that would challenge her abilities and allow her to contribute to missions that mattered. The Barrett rifle in her hands was no longer just a weapon she had borrowed for testing, but a tool she had earned the right to carry through demonstrated excellence that spoke louder than any credentials or recommendations ever could.